Can Mexico enhance the capabilities of North American companies from an IT perspective? Absolutely. Because we're graduating more per capita engineers than India is, right? Because we are super close, because we have USMCA that also protects IP, right? And that enables us to work together.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
You know, there's been a lot of challenges, I guess, recently with a lot of the trade and a lot of the logistics and shipping and cargo. We've been fortunate to meet a whole different type of group of people only because we've been, going to different conferences. But to me, I feel that we've also invited several folks on different things as well, which has been good. But to me, I feel that with this being an election year, number one, and number two, the geopolitical everything. I mean, and not only that, not geopolitical, but also the environment. Like with Panama, different things like that. That nature decides to step in. As we record this, you would think the whole country's already wearing short sleeves and shorts, but I mean, there's several inches of snow falling in the northeast of the United States right now, and disrupting, and then the cargo carrier that ran into the bridge in Baltimore. I mean, things just get disrupted and things go crazy, and so.
Well, and then in addition, there was a earthquake that hit New Jersey just before we started recording this. That just happened. And so in that, it has stopped a lot of, like, the airports are shut down for a little bit here, the trucking, and so a ground stop and whatnot. So there's another disruption here, not only of passenger traffic, but then of cargo. So as we're looking at that, hopefully we can help. There's, what are people doing about it? And you're learning from our show and our guests that here's some tactics and all that. So speaking of which, we're going to have a good discussion today. One of the things that's come up with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, out of China and other, anti-slavery type of initiatives that are going on. People are looking at it going, well, who should I source, or where, if I need to change my sources away from China and whatnot. Obviously we have a big trading partner next door, if you will, to the south of us with Mexico. So we're going to get to talk to somebody that seems to have some expertise in this, but Lalo, won't you introduce our guest? Let's bring him on.
Yes. So, not only is it a good trading partner, but as you remember, it recently became the number one trading partner for the U.S., bypassing China. So with Mexico, so in trying to find a lot more resources for our audience and listening to our audience, I reached out to his name is Alberto Villarreal, and Alberto is he started and created a company called, and I hope I don't mess this up, Alberto, but you can fix it. You can fix it later. But Nepanoa?
Yes, perfect. Nepanoa.
Okay, yes. Nepanoa. Yes, and so
I'm glad you're saying that, because my tongue won't go that way.
Andy, let's try it right now. Nepanoa. You can do it.
Nepanoa. Okay.
There you go. There's a lot of vowels in there.
There you go. So I don't have the sexy way of doing it from a Latin perspective. Let's just put it that way. You guys sound so fantastic.
Let the lady define that, Andy. Let the lady define that. Not us.
I love it.
So Alberto and his company, we'll hear a little bit more about. But as you heard, so Alberto, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us and having this discussion of all business with Mexico.
No, Lalo, Andy, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to chat with you and get to your audience. Right? Let's have a good conversation that it's valuable to everyone.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Nepanoa. How'd you started? What what you guys do, and what's going on with that?
Lalo, appreciate it. So, as you say, my name is Alberto Villarreal Garza. That's in Spanish. In English, it's Alberto Villarreal. I respond to both. But if you know anything about last names in Mexico, Villarreal and Garza are two tremendously popular last names in Monterrey, and that's where I'm from. Right? So I have no problem. I'm either from Monterrey or Monterrey. So grew up in Monterrey. I was a fairly good soccer player more than 20 years ago, and I ended up earning a full ride at Georgia State University. And that's what started my career and my life in the United States. I spent 13 years in one of the big four consulting firms, always doing work, international work for them, right? U.S. companies expanding, growing their operations across Latin America. I'm very proud to say that I've done projects pretty much all across the south of the United States. I think I didn't touch Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Ecuador. But apart from that, pretty much touched every country working. Currently, I live in Chicago. I've been here for 14 years. And the reason that I moved to Chicago is because I wanted to go to business school here while I was working in my prior job. And I went to business school at the University of Chicago. I decided to start Nepanoa. And you won't believe this. In 2006, 2007. When I started my professional career. Why? Because I was doing these projects in Latin America, and I was like, okay, so there's companies that are paying this 22, 23-year-old to do this project for them. There has to be somebody else more experienced that can do it. Right? And from that moment, I was like, okay, I'm going to start my own firm at one point. And that firm is going to focus on helping multinational businesses, particularly American businesses, establish, expand, grow, transform their operations in Mexico. Right? And that dream became a reality in February of 2020 when I started Nepanoa. And Andy, you did a great job pronouncing it. Nepanoa is a word in Nahuatl. Nahuatl was the language of the Aztecs. It was the most in the pre-Columbian era. And Nepanoa means to accompany, to be a companion, to be a guide. And that's exactly what we do. We accompany businesses through important projects of growth, transformation in the U.S. and Mexico. Andy and Lalo, I'm going to warn you. I'm one of the luckiest guys you will ever meet. And I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky for two things. I have a fantastic team that works with me. We have people in Guadalajara, Mexico City, Monterrey, Houston, Austin, New York. I'm very lucky because we have tremendous clients that over the last 4 years have really trusted us with these important problems and projects, and we continue to deliver. So I'm having the time of my life leading Nepanoa.
Well, I will say from a personal perspective, I love the Guadalajara area. I've had the privilege of going down there a few times, and the amount of manufacturing going on in the Guadalajara area is astronomical. I was just blown away. But the thing that was one of the things, just a little side note, that was so fantastic. I mean, every time I've gone down there, all the people are just fantastic, great people. Love the food and all. But I noticed that in some of these industrial parks, you will have, a very large park, and you will have what would look like a big warehouse or something, be some factories in there, distribution centers for pick and pack and whatever. And so they have these big areas, but in the middle, there was this most pristine field with the most beautiful grass and all that. I'm like, what's the deal with this? Soccer. They all have soccer teams and they compete against each other, and it is so fantastic. Absolutely. So I had the privilege of getting to watch some of that.
In the days that I used to sell and run around all over Mexico to sell my software, that was around, that was many years ago. But anyway, I know that workers in certain factories were recruited for their soccer abilities. No, they literally were. This
ringers.
Like, can you sweep? Yeah, can you sweep? Yeah, I can sweep. Okay, you're gonna sweep, but you're actually you're my forward. You're my goalie. You're my midfielder or whatever. They would literally recruit, because there's nothing more prestigious or proud than when you walk into that lobby and you see the big trophies of what they won, right?
Exactly.
But you know what? That's some of the fun things that, even with that, I get it. But it was it was great. There's a lot of pride in behind that. But there's also a camaraderie in that whole industrial park. And then sometimes they would pick like all-stars from that industrial park to go and compete against other areas in the city, wouldn't they?
So, and what it all comes down to is the culture, right? So when we work with companies that are establishing operations in Mexico, one of the first questions that we ask is, okay, but what do you want your culture to be? This is how the culture looks like in Mexico, and we share similar stories as the ones that you're stating right now, right? It's like, hey, you really want your facility to have a space, a recreational space, which is something that simply doesn't exist in manufacturing facilities in the United States, right? It's the big box and then that's it. But then when you go to Mexico, it's like, hey, what's up with this beautiful field or the grill area with a little palapa on the back, right? And that's important. That's part of building a successful culture for your business.
It is. Oh, and it actually, it helps cut down on it helps improve the retention of the employees. In other words, the people are, if they're happy where they work, they just keep on with it and they go from there. So,
I mean, Andy, in Mexico, for manufacturing, of course, it varies by industry, but in general, you should expect a 60% increase in retention versus the United States. So you have a factory in the a rotomolding or a plastic injection company, and you have your factory in Mexico, you will experience a 60% less turnover in Mexico than you would in the United States.
Well, and to that point, as we're talking through that, I guess that's one of the things that, people in the U.S. in particular here, as we're talking through this, when you're looking at companies to consider doing business with, and people talk about, you need to know, who you're dealing with, your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type levels of supply chain. That is a key thing to say. What's the morale of the employees? What's the turnover rate of a company? And that may be something that they should consider asking, because if the turnover rate for a company is really high, that means that the qualities, they're always training, they're always recruiting, whatever. Something's not right there.
Yeah, it's difficult to scale when you have such a high turnover, right? And of course the bottom line is impacted. I mean, we could get into the laws in Mexico, which are very strong, for the employees, right? It's not as easy to let go of employees as it is in other parts of the world, particularly the United States, right? So it truly, truly hinders the performance of a company. But in the end, Andy, sorry, just to comment on this, in the end, and when we look at foreign direct investment that's going into Mexico, last year, depending on which report you read, some say 38, others say 44. Let's stick with $40 billion entered Mexico. And the conversation nowadays, which is different than the conversations we were having 30, 40 years ago, right? When the original North America Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was signed. It's not about cheap labor. It's not about low cost labor. The conversation is around what we're having right now. It's around culture. It's around retention. It's around capabilities. It's around education, right? It's around language. So when and yeah, there's an economic component, as in every business, but it's usually not that driving factor, right? It's not I'm going to go to Mexico just because it's less expensive. Or at least the companies that are successful, they go to Mexico and then they realize, we can really be successful here. It's part of our North American strategy. Or it's part of our global supply chain strategy, and that's when they start growing. And that's what we've been seeing as of late.
Well, and to that, Lila, won't you wanted to start off with asking Alberto about the start of his company and some of the things there, and where we're going here with this.
Yeah, well, I mean, we did already. We talked about when you started, which I mean that you probably picked the worst time in the world to start a company with
Yes.
a month before the pandemic was declared. So, but how did that help? I mean, how would that have, I don't know if it helped. I mean, it may not have helped, but I'm just thinking of, supply chains getting disrupted because now you couldn't get stuff from China. I mean, China and every country were literally shut down. They were literally, you cannot do this anymore, et cetera. But being in Mexico, did that help manufacturers? How did that improve? And what lessons may we have learned from that as well? Because now, with everything that's going on right now, maybe we've learned a lesson and say, well, now we don't need to depend fully on China and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying?
So Lalo, your first point was I started Nepanoa on the worst day possible, and you're absolutely correct. So think about it. I was a director at a big consulting firm with a great salary, married, 2 kids, right? And leaving that, that famous golden handcuff, right? From the founder's dilemma, into starting your own business on February 17th of 2020. And then 2 weeks later, the world turns upside down. I want to be very clear because part of the story, Lalo and Andy, is we're talking a lot about the reorganization of supply chains, the regionalization, the work, of North America as the 3 countries together. But we had a thriving economy before this. And that's important for everyone to understand. It's like, hey, those of us that were already working in U.S.-Mexico trade, we were busy, right? like there were projects, so there were still companies coming, right? So I actually started Nepanoa with one fact only, and it was that 75% of the Fortune 1000 operate in Mexico. I was like, all right, there's a market right there, right? Because it's not only those 750 companies, but it's all their suppliers, it's all their networks, okay? So yes, I felt very dumb in March, April, and then by May, we got the first client. Hey, we're leaving the Philippines. We want to go into Mexico. Help us out. Perfect. That was the first project that we did, right? And then from there, more projects have started coming to us. How was it beneficial, Lalo? It was very beneficial because in my original business plan, I had an office in Chicago and we had an office in Mexico City. COVID comes, there's no offices. Everybody's working from home. And that's why Nepanoa today is super flexible, and we have people in Guadalajara, in Monterrey, in Mexico City, in New York, in Houston, in Austin, in Chicago, because COVID forced us to be flexible, okay? Now, from a manufacturing perspective, I mean, you know this better than anybody, Lalo and Andy, right? The U.S.-China relationship, I mean, it is still very important. It's funny because we talk about how Mexico is now the biggest trading partner, and we're ignoring that China is the third, right? It's like, it's still there, guys. It's diminishing, yes, but it's still there. It's still a very important relationship. But what happened, it was obvious to everybody, right? The supply chains were broken, right? Especially during that 2020. 2021, it recovered. 2022 was a fantastic year for all logistics companies around the world, when we think about it. Right, so that restructuring really potentialized the competitivity of Mexico. And that is very important because Mexico was always there. If you go back into the early 80s, right, there was a great U.S.-Mexico relationship. And then, China got in, a lot of manufacturing moved to China. But if you look at Mexico, you have access to the Pacific, you have access to the Atlantic, right? You border with the United States. You have USMCA, TEMEC in Mexico, CUSMA in Canada, right? That's how they called it. But you're also that link between Canada, United States, and the Latin world, Latin America, right? You're right there in the middle. So that competitivity of Mexico was enhanced. Oh, and to add, Mexico is the country one of the countries with the most trade agreements in the world. So then we say, okay, there's a specialty. Why? Why are there specialized laborers in Mexico? Because of USMCA that happened 40 years ago. NAFTA that happened 40 years ago, right? If when Mexico signed NAFTA in 1980, guys, you could be speaking to C-level executives and they wouldn't speak English. That's what Mexico was, right? There wasn't any qualified manufacturing, qualified people facilities. But then fast forward 40 years, and then it happens, and you look at Mexico, it's like, oh, okay, Mexico is an economy, is a country that is used to working internationally. So COVID, Lalo, as bad as it was from the human side, and we cannot ignore that fact, for Mexico, from an economic perspective, it really potentialized the country. It really did.
Fantastic. All right. So if somebody is interested in looking at, well, let's back up first off. What do you see as far as the trends right now between, U.S. Mexico trade relations, and, where's the opportunity right now that you see?
No, absolutely, Andy. So, of course, the most important opportunity, and that is being capitalized already, is in the auto industry, right? When you look at the trade between both countries, auto is really leading the way. And that one, you also have medical instruments, right? Medical instrument. But it's important to understand why. When you look at medical industries and when you look at an automobile, you're really looking at the same materials, Andy. You're looking at the same type of, you have plastics, you have metals. So think of the people that you use in both industries, and they're easily interchangeable, right? Now, when you get into R&D and technology, that's different. But the actual manufacturing of the products, that's what it is. Of course, you have agro products, which it's a super mature industry between U.S. and Mexico. That's what we trade the most on a daily basis, right? Big opportunities that we're seeing right now, particularly in logistics. Why? Because we have this influx of foreign direct investment coming into Mexico, new companies going into the country, and they are selling intra-Mexico and also into the United States, right? So that increases the need for logistics infrastructure, and logistics companies to provide service. Number two, Mexico is growing more than 20% a year, and is expected to continue to grow more than 20% a year in e-commerce. And for e-commerce to be successful, you need final mile delivery, and that means warehousing, and that means delivery, of course. So those issues combined with the geopolitical issues that we're experiencing, Panama Canal, the Red Sea, the Ukraine-Russia war, the Israel-Gaza war, plus the elections on both sides of the country, are really potentializing the opportunity for logistics service needs in the country. So we're seeing a great opportunity there. So it's manufacturing, it's logistics, and finally it's IT as well, right? And IT, it goes from development all the way into services. No, I'll be very clear. Mexico is not India. It's not, right? You're talking at a completely different demographic. Can Mexico enhance the capabilities of North American companies from an IT perspective? Absolutely. Because we're graduating more per capita engineers than India is, right? Because we are super close, because we have USMCA that also protects IP, right? And that enables us to work together. So those are the three opportunities that we're seeing in particular industries.
Excellent. So one of the things, I guess, especially with the automotive, is the support businesses that are, I guess, support the auto manufacturers, the parts and thereof. And then you've got the secondary that are businesses that are supporting the manufacturing of the parts and thereof. One question I don't know if you are familiar with this, can comment on it. And if not, then I understand that. But I know that China was looking at building, and it is in the process of building some factories to do electric vehicles manufactured in Mexico. And the thought is that they're going to build it there to take advantage of the USMCA. Do you see any of that, and do you see any red flags, or is that a good thing or bad thing, or do you know anything about it?
Oh, Andy, I think you positioned the question very well, or the comment very well, by saying, are there any red flags there? Number one, we have to be very careful because of the lack of transparency that there is from Chinese news, right? Anecdotally, we hear a lot of Chinese investment is going into Mexico. Okay. Mexico is a sovereign country. It's its own independent country, right? They can do business with whoever they want. Mexico has a great relationship with China. Okay. But when you look at the top 10 countries investing in Mexico, China doesn't appear there. The data. So that's why I say anecdotally, we hear a lot of movement from Chinese companies coming into Mexico. But when you look at the data, you need to really take a look at it with a closer, you need to do a double click there. I don't want to get into a Chinese conversation about is it difficult or not to take money out of China or for Chinese investors to go. That's a separate conversation. What it is true is that Chinese companies look for partners, local partners in Mexico, right, to be able to establish, grow, their businesses. And that is part of what's happening. That's why you don't see China in the top 10, because it doesn't necessarily show as a foreign direct investment from China. It is also the case, Andy, that there's companies from elsewhere, right? Germany, France, Spain, Canada, even America, that have operations in China and are diminishing those operations in China or removing them completely and establishing them on North America, North American soil, maybe United States, Mexico, Canada, right? And that also, when you look at it from the strict sense of the data, it counts as foreign direct investment from that country, not Chinese, but indirectly it may be because it's taken it from this pocket to put it in this one. To your point about building manufacturing facilities for electronic vehicles in Mexico, one thing is very clear. The leading companies for electronic vehicles in the world are Chinese. It's not Tesla. I'll repeat that. The leading companies, and we're talking about BYD, we're talking about Jag, we're talking about, in Mexico, we have Chile. You see them, right? All the Ubers that you go in Mexico, they're Chinese cars, right? Even MG is Chinese owned, right? And you cannot find an MG in the United States.
Well, and that's the one thing that I think at this point, there's a lot of, I think the thought is that to this particular issue, the vehicles are being manufactured, but being sent to other countries other than the U.S. because they're not coming into the U.S. right now.
Right now, they're not. So now, what's the biggest vehicle market in the world, Andy?
The biggest one is the U.S.
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can add up the vehicle market in all of Latin America, and it may be close, but.
Alberto, what about, all right, now as far as the trends, we were talking about that, like you said, the automotive, medical devices and whatnot. If I am a U.S. company and I'm looking at trying to change my source away from, let's say, China in this particular case, or any other country, around the world, and I'm interested in in Mexico, what should I do? How do I investigate that, or what do I need to do to check that out?
One of the biggest risks that Mexico faces today is informality. Okay, and what do I mean by informality? Mexico's economy is highly informal, it's highly cash basis, and that applies to everything. That applies to manufacturing, that applies to the tacos that you eat on the street, but it also applies to professional services. So there are very sophisticated, formal, professional companies like mine that can guide these companies through their Mexico journey. The first point to understand is that Mexico is comprised of 32 states. Okay, sometimes when we think of Mexico, we just think of Mexico, right? You understand that Mexico, and these are the Bajas, the country, and then you have the Gulf over here, right? So it's not the same to establish an operation in Monterrey than to establish an operation in Mérida. Now, if your business is suitable for Mérida, then by all means accounts, go to Mérida or go to Baja but that's the first step. The first step is, okay, where do I need to be? Where are my clients? How will my supply chain work? Because if it's 32 states and I'm receiving all my raw materials from Asia, maybe I want to be at the Pacific and then closer to the border, right? Maybe you don't care. Maybe you can come to the Pacific, put it on rail, send it all the way to the northern part, and then to the eastern side of the United States, right? So it's where your clients, how will your supply chain look? And also, what type of people do you need? Similar to what happens in the United States, where the qualifications that you will find in California are not the same than the qualifications that you will find in New York. The same thing happens in Mexico, right? What type of people do you need? What skills are you looking for? How much does it cost? And finally, let's talk about real estate. How much land do you need? Are you okay with any facility? Do you need to build to suit? What are your utilities needs? Do your processes require a lot of water? How many KVAs do you need to maintain your operation running? What about gas? So you put all those factors in a bucket and you make a case for change. You say, okay, let's say that there's 2 or 3 cities that your business is suitable for and that it makes sense. Let's go for it then. And then you start a project. But it has to start with that business case. And it has to make sense from a business perspective. It has to make sense from a people perspective. It has to make sense from a supply chain perspective, and in the end, that's what will make you take a decision. You need to put numbers into it. It cannot be all a hunt or anecdotes, right?
Alberto, but also there's also other considerations where there's like very rich resources, natural resources in parts of Mexico. For example, Monterrey is known for their steel. They're like the Pittsburgh of Mexico, right? They were known many years for that. Now, obviously, technology also because of the Tec de Monterrey, et cetera. So I guess things like that need to be considered that people can't just say I'm just adding to what you were saying, you know what I mean? Because they can't just say I'm going into Mexico and I think I'll be in Juarez, because it's so close to Texas and El Paso, and but sometimes getting the materials and everything you need and manufacturing in Juarez, it does not make sense.
Hello. Take them to Juarez and then let them see the real estate cost in Juarez. And they will think about going further south. Well, that's the thing, right? But that's why you cannot make a decision solely based on one item. Unless, which is the most important of them all, your customer tells you, hey, I need you there next door. That's another story. Because if your customer tells you I need you next door, you say, yes, I'll be next door. That's it, But yes.
And that happens a lot here in Juarez, right? Where like the big company, like Electrolux, for example, they manufacture all those appliances and they say, I need same day or 1 day turnaround on some raw materials. You need to be here. And you're literally connected with a little side road there where you just truck your things back and forth. So yeah.
And you say yes. There's things you cannot negotiate. But yeah, but that's the point. Though. It's understanding all of Mexico and making the right decision. Because if you're going to do that investment, right, you're not doing it for the short term. Unless you're a contract manufacturer and you have a 1 year project, you can do that, right? But if you're thinking of your true North American strategy, okay, we're going to start an operation in Mexico, then you need to think in the long run, right? So you need to make the right decision.
Well, to that point, here's what I'm picking up, though, that Alberto, what you just mentioned, is that if I'm interested in looking, at Mexico as a key source, is to formalize that through a project with a company like yours and somebody that's an expert to say, okay, what are your needs, and go through and allow somebody like yourself to be able to come back and say, here are your options. Here are the, geographic areas we would recommend and all that. But then taking it a step further, let's say you zero in on that. You just mentioned at the beginning of this part of the discussion is the informality of Mexico. It's the informality of the culture. So once you zero in on where you want to be and maybe identify some of those companies you want to do business with, what I'm hearing, as well as maybe some of it's from personal experience, is you need to send people down and plan on developing the relationship with people in those companies to, go down and rub elbows with them, have, and all that to, see if that's going to be a good working relationship. Would that be a fair statement and a good approach?
And in some scenarios it will be, but I'm gonna quiz you again. What's the name of my company, Andy?
Okay. Nepana or Nepana? I don't know. Nepanoa. Okay. I like Nepanoa. Okay.
What Nepanoa mean? Do you remember what it means, Andy Orlando?
Is a guide. Is a guide
to a company. Exactly. So, Andy, if you and I are going to climb any mountain, and our guide, Sherpa, or whatever tells you, hey guys, here's the map, here's what you're going to do. And then you're going to find this tree and you're going to make a right. Watch out for this hole over here because you may die. And then, all right, guys, see you in 2 days. And he leaves. Is that a guide? Right? No, right? So where I'm going with the informality of things is, I'll give you the best example. You find someone, oh yeah, I'll help you out. I know all things Mexico. And you say, hey, I want to explore 4 different cities. And then that advisor says, no. You have to go to, and let's choose Chihuahua. You have to go to Chihuahua, and you're like, okay. And nothing else explores. And then it turns out that same advisor, his cousin owns the land that he wants your company to be in. But you don't find out until later. But guys, it happens so many times.
Yes.
I'll give you an example in sourcing. Hey, I wanna manufacture, I don't know, what do I have here? Portable batteries for my cell phone, right? Oh, absolutely excellent. Charging over here, and then you get to Mexico, the relationship is done, and you realize that your advisor was also getting a commission from the supplier, and also so it's the famous double dipping, right? Those are things that hinder with the independence of the service that is being provided. Okay, so that's what I meant by being informed, because when you're talking about large investments like this, you have to be cautious and take care and do things the right way. Okay, now to your second point about sending people, rubbing elbows, and doing things the right way, absolutely. So what I described is the decision phase. You make a decision. The whole process of people, supply chain, manufacturing, what do you need? That's the decision. Okay, so you make a decision, but then after the decision comes the plan. Hey, when are we going to knock on the government's door and tell the government of Querétaro, hey, we're going to have 150 people working here. I just wanted to introduce myself, right? My company is, Lalo and Associates, and we make widgets. Fantastic. Okay, let's negotiate, please. All right, let's start hiring people. Let's register the entity. Andy, let's open a bank account. It's not as simple as it is in the U.S. In the U.S., you go into a website and you have an entity in 2 hours. You go to a branch of any bank and you walk out of there with a checking account. Guys, I've helped companies that come to us saying, I've been talking to a bank for 8 weeks and I cannot open a checking account. Right? While working with us, 5 days, 3 days, 2 days, boom. Right?
Well, but that's the point of having somebody to help. How to navigate, if you will, the bureaucracy within Mexico and all that. And that's where I was going when I was talking about zeroing in. Yeah, definitely. You start with a project. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish, and let the expert give you guidance on here's the recommendations, here where you go, you work through that, and then take them with you to go down there or have them set it up. I mean, that I agree with that 100%, because they know the situation there. And I will say, I've had more fun when I have allowed others, rather than me trying to dictate something, is like when I mentioned to you, been down to Guadalajara several times, and I'll let the local folks set up, here's where I'm coming, here's where we're going, here's what we're doing. And they wound up having me attend some meetings with people I hadn't even originally planned on. I was going down there to help fix a problem and saying, what's going on? And in that case, they were manufacturing, they were sending to the U.S., there were U.S. clearance delays. I went down there, and so not only did we do that, but then all of a sudden there were 4 other companies they wound up, hey, we need you over here. They were running me around in the car. It was fantastic, though. Oh, my gosh, the dinners, the time, the people, the wonder. It was just fantastic times. I got to tell you, though, man, I felt like a horse done been rode hard and put up wet by the time I was done with those meetings, because it was such a great time, but it was business, and yet there was some fun.
Network, that's what you call, hey, the network of doing business in Mexico. And you mentioned something very important. You mentioned the word together, going together. And that is, right, it's about collaboration. I will never claim that I know one of my clients' business better than they do, right? But my company, we do know Mexico, right? And our job is to avoid Mexico moments. And what's a Mexico moment? Is the government not getting back to you in 3 weeks when they told you it was going to be 2. It's not being able to open a bank account. Is someone trying to get you to sign a lease in a park that doesn't have the KVAs that you need for your facility. That's a Mexico moment. So we live off of navigating those risks and making sure that the things go well, but it's together. It's in collaboration. We have to do it together. So yeah, I mean, that's what it is, guys. And it's something very important, guys. I mentioned the government a little bit. Something very interesting that the Mexico government did is that at the federal level, there's not a communicated strategy for the country for foreign direct investment. So what's happening is that they're letting the 32 states go after companies and attract them, right? So that's why you have Nuevo León, Jalisco, Querétaro, San Luis, Chihuahua. The usual suspects win, right? But where I'm going with this is I have been amazed that in the last 4 years, especially the secretaries of economic development of particular states have been tremendously active, traveling, going after companies, to attract them into being able to facilitate doing business in their states. And that's something that hadn't happened before. And that is key. We're actually bringing in June, we're doing a Mexico expansion summit here in Chicago. We're sponsoring it. Nepanoa, we're organizing it. And we're bringing the Secretary of Economy of Jalisco, of Nuevo León, and Baja California, right? So 3 of the Secretaries of Economy, they're coming to Chicago. That just didn't happen before, right? And now they're coming to Chicago to meet with companies and be like, all right, guys, here we are. Well, what do you need? What can we answer for you?
Let's stop for a second. All right. So with that right there, when are you planning on those meetings?
June 13, Andy, you're in. And you and I'll see.
Okay. So I was just going to say to our listeners, if you are interested in that inch of the Chicago area there, you're talking mid-June there, June 13th, take a look at that. That's something that would, especially if you're local into that area, but oh my gosh, that would be phenomenal, because I know that each of the states operate a little differently as far as doing business. And so there's, what's the best way? And I mean, Lalo, you hit it, some are, and I forgot where you were in Monterrey. I think you were talking about is the more of the steel, but I mean, different aspects of that is like, NEPA. How do you say it again?
Andy. NEPA.
Nepanoa. I'll get it eventually. Listen, my memory's as long as a turtle's tail and just as fast. Forgive me for botching that. So I'm like, Nepanoa. I'll get it eventually. Okay. Anyway, all said and done, folks, I mean, this would be something to take a look. We will have Alberto's contact information on our show notes. But that is a key thing to look at, even if you are already sourcing in Mexico or you're wanting to expand your sources within Mexico. That would be a key meeting to take a look at. Not that I'm trying to give an advertisement for you, but man, I see a great opportunity.
It's going to be downtown Chicago. We're going to have panels around manufacturing, logistics, real estate, talent, technology. And of course, we're gonna have the secretaries be on a panel, but more importantly, the secretaries will be available having one-on-one meetings with companies interested to invest in their states.
And that's so important because, again, developing relationships are so important. Then, if you're in the U.S., we always try a lot of times, go in, it's like negotiate the deal right off the bat. It's like, no, wait a minute. Who am I doing business with? Developing that relationship first is, in my opinion, better in doing business in Mexico than going straight to negotiating and all of that.
And you're absolutely right, Andy. It's on a day-to-day basis, and even the way meetings start in Mexico. Hey, how are you? How's your family? How's business going? And then you get to the heart of the matter. And I'm not saying either one is right or wrong, but in the United States, hey, how are you? Intros? All right, let's go. Boom. This is what I'm going to be talking about, and this is what I'm going to be listening for. The purpose of this meeting is to see how we can collaborate, right? Like literally, you kick off a meeting like that. In Mexico, you do that, and people are like, excuse me, who are you?
Yeah. Well, I will say this is that from that particular approach, I mean, I'm involved with this podcast and SimplyTrade because the relationship I have with Lalo and I, Lalo and I've known each other for a long time, and he'd been mad, but it was one of those things where he came up with the idea and we were pushing forward. And it's because of our relationship that I was looking at him going, I think you're full of beans there, Lalo, because this is one of those things I don't think anybody's going to want to listen to, us, and especially from my perspective on me. But he's like, no, he saw more potential in this than I did. But it's like, you know what? In our relationship, I literally looked at him and like, well, you know what? I trust the guy. So, Lalo's one of those guys. If it's going to rain, if he tells you it's going to rain, you can set your tubs out. It's going to rain. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to trust him.
Excellent.
Well, thank you. So Alberto, we're almost running out of time here, but I did want to ask you something. Maybe you can use it in closing or make a comment before you do a closing. But you talked earlier about the the elections. I know we know where Trump stands. We know where Biden stands. I mean, we know more or less. I mean, who knows? Biden may decide to start doing more free trade agreements or anything. Trump may ease up on tariffs, but they both have been very clear. So we know the U.S. side, and this is one of those unique times. Every so often, I think every 12 years is when we have the Mexico and U.S. coming on elections together. I think that's the way it is. So. But this year happens to be that time, and in Mexico, there is no such thing as two terms. You serve as president for one term, and that's it. I mean, and that's 6 years, right? Because it's 6 years, right, instead of 4 years. But this is one of those years where there's a lot of really interesting things that are going out in Mexico right now. The two top candidates are female, for one. Xochitl and Claudia. One of them is still moving along with AMLO's, or the current president AMLO, his political party, La Moderna, I think it is. Modena, yeah. So he's in that. She's in that party. I think that's Claudia. And then Xochitl is more of the traditional, PRI, PAN, PRD. I'm sorry. Party. Eventually people and the governments and everybody warmed up to AMLO, because in the beginning it was kind of a little touch and go. Like he didn't want to do too much of, like free trades and business and all that. He was very close to that, but they warmed up to it. Like, what do you see can mess things up, or can, like, where are things going to go really crazy? I mean, like if Claudia or Xochitl win, you know what I mean? 'Cause I'm thinking one of those two is going to win.
That's okay. So let's focus on Mexico first. What truly could mess things up in the short term is that we have a volatile election. And what's a volatile election? We're talking about an election where there's uprisings in specific parts of the country, right? And I think that's a shared risk also in the United States, right? Where volatile direction in the short term would be there's uprisings, there's protests, there's physical activity, right? That really send the markets, investors, businesses into a wait and see mode. I think that's short term, and that one applies for both countries. But going back to Mexico, Claudia is ahead on most polls, but as you know, polls may or may not be right. Now, that transition of power in case Xochitl wins, it's a testament to the world of, hey, there's stability in Mexico, right? Regardless of who's in power, there's stability in Mexico. It will continue in this upward trend. Okay. If Claudia wins, which is what the polls say, which is she's part of the party of the president, which is Morena, then we're quasi guaranteeing that that trend, right, or that behavior, at least for the time being. In the long run, Lalo, Andy, there's many different decisions that need to be made. Looking towards trade between the U.S. and Mexico, it is of Mexico's interest to be the best trading partner of the United States. But it's also in Mexico's interest to be able to work with any other country in the world, right? Now, when we go to the United States, as you mentioned, we know where Biden stands, we know where Trump stands. Polls at this stage right now. That short-term risk of having a volatile election, I think it exists as well. We also have that transition of power, which, let's be honest, guys, 4 years ago, we didn't have an easy transition of power. And we could expect that from any other country in the world, but the United States, right? It's like, okay, in the modern history, right, we didn't have an easy transition of power, and that sent the markets, business, everything into a halt for at least a few months, right? And then we got into business again. So if Trump wins, I think the line is very clear. It's America first. It's bring jobs back. It's a very, very tough renegotiation of USMCA, update of USMCA in 2 years. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's what will happen. And when we go into Biden, it's more consistency as to what we are having today. If you tell me, Alberto, who's going to win in Mexico, it's a toss-up. If you're going to win in the United States, it's a toss-up. From my perspective, I think we're going to let people vote, and then we'll see what happens.
Alberto, you obviously not only know Mexico and all that, but you know your business, know the ins and outs. Folks, I want to tell you, if you're interested, this is not an infomercial for. All right, let me look at the sign. Nepanoa. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't. It's Nepanoa. It's not that difficult. It's just
funny story about that. Before you close, funny story. Have you tried to buy a website recently? There are no websites available, right? So when I was naming the business and I found this word, I was like, okay, it may be complex for some, but I really love the meaning of it. It's like to a company. It's a verb. It's to a company, to be a companion, and the fact that it's now a tool. And then I saw, okay, well, it's mostly vowels, so that enables people to say it. But then I went online. I was like, nepanoa.com. Guys, these are the best $12 I have invested in my whole life. It was available. Nepanoa.com was available. So it was a sign from God to do the business.
There you go. Makes it easy. Yeah. I love it. Well, listen, Alberto, I greatly appreciate you being on our show. Lalo, any last words from yourself on?
No, that's it. I mean, I know we'll definitely have you back on our show, Alberto. It's a lot of cool stuff going on whenever we, for sure, after the elections for both U.S. and Mexico. I mean, it would probably be around this time next year, but when we'll have like a definite who won and all that, but that'll be cool because I think the Mexican president takes over in December, and then the U.S. president in January.
November,
of course.
November 2nd in Mexico, then you have January in Mexico, in the U.S.
Yes, yes.
May we live in interesting times,
cool.
gentlemen.
But we'll definitely
live in interesting times.
It will, yeah. But we'll have you back before that, so don't worry.
My pleasure. Lalo, Andy, thank you very much for the invitation. Greatly appreciate chatting with you. And I hope to see you on June 13th. And if not, when I'm, either in Memphis or in El Paso, I would love to meet you in person. Thank you for your time, guys.
Awesome.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, you'll always have a place here, so don't worry.
Michael, for Chicago.
Folks, with that, again, please like us, share us, talk about the SimplyTrade podcast. We definitely can use the continued support, but we greatly appreciate you. So with that, have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us. SimplyTrade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor SimplyTrade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at SimplyTradePod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. SimplyTrade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by SimplyTrade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.